everyone. Welcome to another episode of Hashing Out the Law. I'm your host, Arash Hashemi. This episode, my guest is Chintan Desai. I've been practicing that. I hope I got it right. How you doing today?
Good. How about you? Thank you for
I'm
having me
doing
on.
I'm doing great. Yeah, we were trying to have you on earlier, but there was some technical difficulties on our parts. But the reason I wanted to have you on is to talk about sports NIL. I know you do other stuff. That's the topic that I wanted to learn because I'm selfish and I do these things to learn myself. But please tell us a little about yourself and your practice before we get into it.
Sure, sure. So I do, I say this as jack of all trades, master of none, but I'd like to say master of all of them. But I do a mixture of patent, trademark, copyright, um, and that's the prosecution, the enforcement, and then the associated litigation, as well as domain name proceedings. And it kind of all kind of comes together, when advising clients. And, more often than not, you get pulled into the tangential things, related to IP. So a lot of it is sometimes mergers and acquisitions, things like that, where there's, I'd say, like an IP influence or an IP, you know, a, a slice of IP involved in the transaction or in, let's say, the counseling, for a company or even the individual. And I've been doing that it's been about 9 years now, almost 9 years. Yeah.
So I know that in order to be part of the patent bar, you got to have a engineering background or a science background. What was your background and how did you get into patent law to start with?
Yeah, so I was biomedical engineering and a math minor. I'd love to say that that was the easiest way to get a good GPA. It was not. I was basically pre-med and I hit organic chemistry and I was like, no, this isn't for me. But I did like engineering. So I kind of, continued with bioengineering and finished with a math minor. But all the while, I took some legal studies courses, and I was able to take like sports business law, e-commerce law, and those things kind of piqued my attention. And then you would think after graduation, I would go right into that. Nope. So I kind of went actually into environmental law, and it kind of just happened to be that, a work study job that started at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. Um, they were doing an environmental justice study, and it was down in, Parkersburg, West Virginia, a place I never thought I'd be. And it was basically the Aaron Brockovich type story on the clinical side. And so, I got to go down there, had the, wanted to follow through essentially. So I worked under a PI, and for 5 years, actually after undergrad, I continued working on this environmental health, research, looking at the byproduct of Teflon processing, perfluorooctanate, perfluorosulfonate. Come full circle, after, my PI was like, you know what, we're kind of, it was all on grant funding. So come full circle, then I was like, all right, after 5 years, time to go to law school, which I'd kind of intended, after taking legal studies courses and doing that. And then, so I went to Rutgers Law. And then during that portion, I was actually lucky enough to work on the at work Department of Environmental Protection at Norris in Pennsylvania, and actually work with the same people that I worked with in my previous life on the, on the social justice side, kind of. So it came full circle. But all that said, I'd always pushed myself away from, patent law to the extent I could because I was like, no, I don't want to be pigeonholed. But, I would take courses and I was taking IP courses even in like law school, and I kept getting drawn towards it and I had a knack for it. And so, um, right after, basically after law school ended, I kind of went right into, a small IP firm, and the rest is history. I kind of, you know, I'd like to say I did environmental law stuff. I have not. Um, but a lot of it was just driven by interest, and, so I don't have that. I'd always want to be a lawyer, or I'd always wanted to be a patent lawyer. It just kind of, I wanted to see the adventure and I saw it through.
And now that you are a patent lawyer, do you feel comfortable? You're like, this is what I'm supposed to be?
Yeah, yeah. I see, like I draw on like different parts of my life, and I think the way I got here is exactly the way I would have wanted it. Albeit I wish, of course, the one regret is my undergrad GPA could have been a lot better if I didn't, make it the hard way. But nevertheless, yeah, no, everything led me to this moment. So, and I draw upon that. So whether it be on patents where I'm working on, you know, medical device stuff, or I'm working on, let's say, in like mechanical inventions, and I'm drawing on my engineering like background and working with like individual inventors, or even just like working with clients where I'm, basically discussing things, one-on-one or taking charge or leading. All of it kind of draws upon that experience I've had, whether it be, that in between of 5 years between undergrad and law school and even beyond, which I think all have contributed to where I'm at now.
Awesome. I know I've never taken organic chemistry, but I know it has changed a lot of lives from what I hear. A lot of people have
Yeah.
enrolled in it, and at that point they decide that nope, I'm going to change my career path.
Yeah. I was gonna add my better half. She actually continued all the way through and she is a doctor. Um, I couldn't do it, but bless her, she's doing it.
Well, that's good. You have a doctor and a lawyer, so
Yeah.
it's a good balance.
Yeah.
It's a great balance. So, um, I know that sports NIL is I don't want to say new, but it's newer. Um, how did that come into your practice? Is that something that current clients needed help with, or is that something that you figured I can help them with that because I'm helping them with copyrights and patents and things like that?
Yeah, so it kind of was a natural extension of things. So I'd like to say, in the beginning, like, working in a small firm, it was a lot of the times it was the individual inventor or the individuals that are just really starting out, or like the startup companies that are just, bet the product. So a lot of it is just really honing down and, identifying what to prioritize, right? And I think having those small clients, it would be great to say, oh yeah, spend money on this protection, think about this. But when you're in that early stage, especially when you're working with individuals, there isn't like a limitless cash flow, right? And so our job as like counselors is to essentially identify, okay, what are the things you want to protect? What's important to you? Because at the end of the day, the business drives the IP, not the IP driving the business. And I think sometimes clients will sometimes say, well, if I get a patent on this, or, if I can get this trademark, that'll help me decide what I want to do with my business. And I said, you got to look at it the other way. Really, it's really, our job is to essentially say, all right, what are your business goals? What are you trying to do? And I say the NILs, because that's really just an extension. Instead of a corporation or a small company, it's an individual. And
Right.
so, what do you want your image to be? What do you want your brand to be? And it's not just now, but it's years from now. And I think having that conversation or thinking about it early on, allows you to prioritize. Okay, there are things that you want to say, all right, these are the things I want to focus on. These are the things that are on the back burner, but I want to make sure that I have the ability to do them if things are, work out well. I want to make sure that I prioritize them. So our job is to kind of, identify things that they should be considering. And really, I feel like sometimes it's issue spotting. And I say issue spotting because, you know, you don't know what you don't know, but there are ways to think about, okay, hey, you should be aware of this, or you should be aware of this. And I think particularly even just with NIL, it's such a rapidly changing landscape that I think it's important for individuals to know. And, the one thing I try to, kind of always try to maintain or, emphasize is, you know, once it's out there, your name, your brand, it's out there. It's out of your control. So right now, early on, this is your opportunity to shape the narrative. This is your opportunity to say, all right, this is what I want to see it go. Obviously, it doesn't always, but this is your chance to kind of define what you want to see and where you want to see things go.
So you basically help entrepreneurs because sports or athletes, they're entrepreneurs as well, and you help them from the very beginning to set up their business, protect their brand, uh, copyright if they need, patent if they have an idea, and things like that. And the NIL, it's infused into that because that's part of now. It's the athlete's brand and identity. It's his image and his likeness. Correct?
Yeah, that's great.
So let's talk about the NIL. It's very interesting and fascinating to me. So before, like if you played NCAA 1994, um, I don't know if they had it back then, but if you play EA Sports NCAA, at
Yeah.
one point they would have the actual college athletes, their likeness. And I believe it was a UCLA player who started it. He sued them and eventually down the road we have what we have today, the NIL. Um, what, how did that change the landscape as far as doing business as a college student? And what can these college athletes do to protect their brand?
Yeah, so I think, and I don't know if this is a good comparison, but it feels like a natural comparison is the way that you see now, like legalized sports gambling, you know, and how like professional leagues and even I guess the NCAA approaches that. It was one of those things where before, the NCAA would operate as a quasi kind of a cartel, you know, under the guise of, okay, we don't want to give unfair, advantages to any one player or, any one school, but under the, under the radar, they were essentially getting, the benefit of all of this, monetizing essentially their name, the image, the likeness, the merchandising, and they were just collecting all of the money. Um, and so what you'd see is underlying, you'd see, boosters, or they call them like collective associations now, which feels like a much nicer term. But there would be money exchanged, and it would be in the shadows or it would be done, but it was kind of one of those like, everyone looks down or didn't see it. And you'd see it occur here and there, but it was a slap on the wrist, or people didn't really investigate far. And similar, I was gonna say with like, like sports gambling, it was offshore before, it was still occurring. Everyone always said, oh, I had a bookie or something like that. Things like that occurred, but now that it's on the, quote unquote up and up, I think it's good in the sense of, it really shines the light on what's occurring in the shadows. That being said, there's always this thing of there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, right? So now with that, you have this kind of new thing, like, so for example, sports gambling, you had all these states rush to, all right, develop, all right, what are we going to do? What are we going to allow? Whether it be parlays or certain things, like certain states have very specific rules. Other states have still not even embraced it yet, which, surprising. And then you have then the leagues. And so the leagues have realized like, okay, gambling is going to be around for the long haul. And so we essentially have to play this game where we're, accepting it, embracing it, but at the same time, quote unquote, maintaining the integrity of the game. And, you know, I think the leagues have done a decent job of that because, we've the Tim Donaghys and all that before that was occurring before all of this was on the up and up. Right. So now I think they're more aware of it and they're embracing it, which I think ultimately they have to. Similarly, in this situation, I think the NCAA is really, it's like when free agency hit the NFL, and it was like when Reggie White was, and I say that like I'm older, but I remember like Reggie White was like, the one that led the way into that, kind of movement. And now you see that with the NCAA, and I think you see this patchwork basically, and I say patchwork because it's, there isn't any one, kind of set of rules that defines it, but generally it's about allowing compensation. Certain states will say, okay, you can't do certain things. Like, for example, I think like Texas has like, you can't endorse, alcohol, tobacco, certain products like that. Other states don't have that restriction. And then you have the NCAA here still trying to kind of claim or say, hey, wait a minute, this was our thing. Now, like they also want their own regulations to try to like at least claw back, but each time they try to do something that gets challenged because ultimately, this is how we got here. I think it's good because you see a lot of this was already occurring, you know, on the back end. But with that, I think the difficulty, especially for I think some college athletes, is determining, this is just really what professional athletes were doing. But I think you see a lot of times where, I don't want to say everyone can make it, but you kind of have this chaos, for example, with like the transfer portal where, the NCAA has now made it easier for people to transfer, and that's a good thing. But now people aren't necessarily, people used to transfer like, oh, okay, there's a better opportunity for more playing time at this school, or have this opportunity. Now you have this whole NIL mix in where, oh, if I'm, let's say, a Division I athlete at, a much smaller school, and if I'm just an average athlete at a bigger school, I can get more money, endorsing in endorsements at this bigger school. So I'm going to move. So you see a lot of kind of, I think, I don't want to say chaos, but I think you see a lot of autocorrection. And there's one thing about free agency in like the professional leagues, but now when you're talking about in such a small window where like, and I say small window, like academically, in theory, you don't see as much obviously with like the 4-year players at Duke are like, staying all the way through, but you're seeing all this movement. And I think a lot of the different stakeholders or the cooks in the kitchen are trying to figure out, all right, I want a piece of the pie. And that's state. Those are like government stakeholders, on the state level, federal level, still trying to figure out, if there's a national standard they should have. And then you have the schools that are saying, wait a minute, we need to make sure our universities can attract, Division I athletes and, encourage them to come here. And then you have all these boosters that are now collectives that are now essentially given the green light to operate, outside of the shadows and say, okay, now we can actively just recruit and actively spend money. So, there's a kind of a need for, I think, regulation. And I
So let
think
me
they're getting there.
like I think you're right. It's correcting itself as it's happening. And it's some people say it's a good thing that this came. It gives students an opportunity to make some money because they were being taken advantage of. But there's some people that are against it. Like Nick Saban, he said that it changed the game. He can't coach the way he wants to anymore for whatever reasons he said. But that's one of the other sides of it. My question to you is, how are the smaller schools, like let's say the local university that's locally known, okay? In Southern California, we have like Cal State schools, right? Obviously, they can't compete with Alabama, Duke, Texas. How are they gonna survive with this NIL? Um, Obviously, they're not gonna get those bigger Division I athletes that can make so much more money if they go to Alabama and Duke. Not that they could have before, but the chance might have been there. The guy might have wanted to play there because his family went there or something.
Right.
But now that we bring in the money aspect of it, he's going to go, well, yeah, my dad might have played there, but I can make this much more money without being a pro. How is that going to affect the schools that can't compete with the bigger Dukes and Alabamas?
Well, I think the interesting thing is, I think it actually gives them a chance to compete. And the reason I say that is because even before, it was gonna be tough for that small school to keep the player, especially let's say they'd have more playing time and they'd have more visibility in the spotlight because even if they weren't going to make the money now, basically post amateur career, that was going to be their ability to kind of launch into the next step, which would be the professional, leagues. So now I guess, even, not everyone, like there aren't enough spots, let's say at some of the top schools, but now this is very sport dependent. You may see even smaller universities be able to say, okay, we can't give you like the Division I scheduling, right? Or that you're not going to play, the SEC like teams, but you will be able to get, be in the spotlight, and you will be able to get some, endorsement money, albeit it may be smaller, it's on a local level, but it's more than not. And so I think, while it swings the other way, you won't get the halves, but you will still, now get some people that may not have come to that small school or may not have stayed at that small school because, it's their second choice of their ability to maybe, do something more than they haven't, or wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to do.
Now, does this also apply to athletes at the high school level? Let me be specific. I know that minors can technically get into contracts, but let's say you're 18 years old, you're a senior, you're a 5-star recruit, and you're being recruited by these people. But in your senior year, when you turn 18, can you do an NIL deal?
So I was going to say that's kind of where the confusion comes. So it depends on state. So some states actually have, incorporated, high school athletes and like included certain, compensation levels or what, requirements. But I think it's still the wild, wild west because all we've really seen is, professional leagues, it's always been like what's been. Now college is experiencing what professional leagues had. And now the next step, you're right, is high school. Now some states have things, other states don't. And I think, I don't know where that goes. And I think it's a really dangerous line because I think the younger it is, I think there's more, chance for I it's I want to say you losing your path because you're more impressionable as you're younger. And I want to say at least in college, I want to say the facade of higher education, but I think, some people realize, hey, like athletics is a ticket to a really good institution's education, which I normally wouldn't get because let's say I wouldn't necessarily get it on just, on my grades. But then the converse of that is on the flip side, you're going to see people that are say, well, this is my ticket out in high school. And so, you're gonna lose people that say, all right, sometimes like the college education, that's your quote unquote, like I would say your consolation gift or a consolation prize, but that's a great one because ultimately that's what's going to help you, in your life post, let's say post sports, if you don't make it, that's what's going to, give you something to work with for the rest of your life. And I think, the earlier you go, the harder it is. And so once you realize, let's say, oh, it doesn't work out, that emphasis on education, at least it's there in college to some extent. I think it gets harder and harder, especially when, younger athletes are more impressionable and more likely to kind of, not necessarily weigh all the options and kind of see the forest from the trees.
I I think I agree with you. I think one of the aspects of it that's negative is now it's even worse for that person thinking, oh, this is my ticket to make some money. Now they're going to say, okay, now I can make money in college too. And they're going to lose focus. But again, like you said, it's the wild, wild west. So we got to see how it turns out. Now, let me ask you this. If I'm an athlete and I am about to enter my college years, and I have the potential to get endorsements. Should I set something up before I'm approached? So if I'm approached, I'm ready, or should I set something up afterwards? But when I say set something up, I mean speaking to a lawyer, getting everything ready. When should I do it?
I think, it's like financial literacy. And I think, you see with professional leagues now, just like the part of the rookie symposium is like all this stuff about, hey, you're going to have your biggest contract. I think it's the same concept. I think it's important to know what you're getting into, especially when it is the Wild Wild West. Now, there's some like states that have certain rules and, about deals, but they're still trying to figure out along the way. I think it's important to have that because, you know, you don't know the landscape. And I think it's important to set that up to the extent you can. And I know for some people, they're on the fringe, right? They may not be, okay, we're set, or this is going to be what I'm doing forever. It's important to at least make an attempt to kind of inform yourself or at least work with someone, whether that be a financial advisor, whether it be an attorney, to understand the landscape because there's so many moving pieces. And I think that's going to be the biggest emphasis, especially when you don't have like a gold standard. You have, these different agreements. And then mind you, even when you're in college, you know, even if you transfer to a school, the chances that you transfer to the same state or, you may transfer to a different state and that could be a different set of rules or a slightly different thing. So, when you're talking about even contracts that you've entered, how does that play in? Are you breaking your contract? Do you have to continue it? Are you running afoul of that school you're transferring to? So, it's important to kind of, be educated or be aware of certain things. And again, it goes right back to issue spotting. So at least that you know what to look for. And then you may not know the answer, but this is something I need to look at and understand before I just, go to the wolves again.
Now, I know you said that every state has their own rules, but is it is it across the board that an NIL can be negotiated by an agent? Or let me rephrase that. So if I'm going to negotiate, I need an agent, right? The agent has to be, if I'm a professional, I need an agent. The agent has to be approved by the NFL's Players Association, NBA Players Association, and my agent negotiates my contracts for me and everything. If I'm in college, can I negotiate my NIL myself? Do I need an agent? How's that done?
So it goes back to it depends, right? So what the NCAA actually in their most recent rulings they've tried to essentially create this voluntary agent process where you can register with the NCAA. And then certain states have certain rules, but really, it really does depend on the state, right? And I think as they're figuring it out, it's constantly changing. And so there isn't necessarily like, okay, this is the way it's done. And I think, I say the NCAA is like a cartel, and I kind of, hit them on that. But I do think some of their efforts, even though there's a silver lining of self-serving, because they want to stay relevant in all this, I think there are some good things that come out of it, because I think whatever the NCAA essentially mandates or tries to put together as their rules, those give insight, those things or those results give insight to the different states, but also the different attempts. I think we've had like 5 different attempts to do federal bills, on a national NIL standard. And I think that's a good thing, because, and hopefully maybe it's like emissions, like California right now, they've led the nation, like, they've always set the standard, and it was always, most states just said, okay, we have to beat that. And then the national standard was based on the California standard. Similarly, in NIL, they were the first state that had the first NIL law. And so states have followed their guidance. And I think ultimately it's going to be important to have that national standard, but it really still is the wild, wild west in terms of that.
All right, so I'm an entrepreneur. I'm starting a business. I have some trademarks or copyrights that I need done. I need some patents, and I'm also going to have an NIL soon. How do I get a hold of you?
Well, I was gonna say, so I'm Lippis Matthias, and so you can contact me anytime. And you know, the one thing I really enjoy is like talking to the individual inventor or the individual person, because it's like being on the ground level of like a startup, and kind of understanding where they're going. And so I think, you know, I'm always open to initial consultations and like discussing, okay, what is it you want to protect? Because, it's important to, our job is to essentially say, yeah, I would ideally love if everyone had limitless money and we'd be like, okay, let's protect this, let's do that. But realistically, it's my job to like, take it all in and say, all right, this is what you should focus on. These are the things you want. You said this is important to your business. And so I think that's really kind of, I'd say, where I really enjoy, I think, working with, say the individual or the startup on that level. And to the extent I can't necessarily, let's say, I say I do the IP side, but then there's the, other things that are associated with the tax considerations. My colleagues can do that. And so I work closely with them. And that's kind of, the benefit of working now at a much larger, law firm where, IP is a big portion, but it's a full service firm. And, nowadays it's so much easier. No one says, all right, I'm going to have one lawyer do this, one lawyer do this, one lawyer do this. And they're all going to be from different firms. It's, you want that one stop shop, right? Just like when you go to a sports agency, you want that one stop shop for marketing, contracts review, licensing, you name it, everything. And so that's the kind of the goal. And I think that's something that's really important, especially when you're just trying to figure out, hey, how do I keep the lights on for this business? Or, I want to get this product out the door. I want to, just surviving to the next month or the next year is really the goal. So I think it's important. I think that's something that we can provide.
Now, we're going to include all the contact info for you and your firm in the podcast episodes. The YouTube version, we're going to put in the comments. The audio version, it'll be in the description. Let's go back to the NIL before we end this fascinating conversation. And I really mean it. It is fascinating to me. So one of the things that comes to mind is I'm an athlete. I'm a good athlete. I'm not a great athlete. I'm going to get a scholarship to a college, a D1 college. I might not be in Alabama or a Duke, but I know I'm not going to be a pro. Now, the positive thing is I can use my 3-4 years that I'm going to be there because I'm that athlete that's going for the scholarship, right? It's my opportunity to get a good education free. Uh, it's my opportunity to make some money. Do you think I have the same chance as making as much money as I can going to a school like Duke that gave me the scholarship, but I know I'm not going to move forward to the NBA, right? How is that NIL? Does it, let me rephrase, do I have the same chance as the superstar who's there for 1 year and he's gonna get max NIL and then move on to the NBA?
Well, I was going to say, so, disproportionately, it won't. And the reason being is, that even that, let's say that 1 year superstar, I don't think NIL really, and this is, I don't know if this sounds bad, but I don't think NIL changes whatever they do. Because if they're that good, they're only doing the year for, let's say, like eligibility reasons, and they're just, they're going to make the money at the professional level already, and it's very clear. So this NIL, I don't know if says, well, hey, I have a chance to make some money early, because it's kind of been happening on the side already, or not necessarily on the side, but they have a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of income that, I would say around the corner.
Right. But
You
do
know,
I get that opportunity too? Now that there's NIL, before I wouldn't have that opportunity, right? Do I get that opportunity now to make some money while I'm in college when I'm playing ball and getting a free education?
Well, so I do think you do get that ability to make money, but I also think it lets you essentially, to the extent, even if you're not going to be like in the pros, you're not going to do that. You may still want to be involved in athletics, right? You may be still involved in, let's say, the industry, right? Whether like in just sports. And so before, you can really use your name or likeness. You can really establish your brand. This lets you basically, invest in yourself down the line, but also make money in the interim. So you can make NIL money, but also, I think the kind of important thing is you get to essentially establish your brand, your name at an early stage where you normally would be like, all right, I have to wait until I'm done amateur athletics, then I can use my name and likeness. Now, obviously, if you have a company or something like that and it's not your name, different story. But there are people, that are still want to be involved. Like, let's say it's a foundation. Let's say, you want to do something, a social mentor beyond just athletics, right? You want something to survive beyond your professional athletic career. That's where I think it really is important because it lets you do that early on. And I think, even people that aren't athletes, right now at the professional level, but they once they were involved in athletics in college, you don't that just doesn't go away. And I think this is an opportunity for them to also say, all right, I might not be able to do this, but I can at least establish my name or my brand. And then of course, to the ones that can't make it, NIL lets you at least, keep the lights on, helps with books, helps with tuition. Those are all good things because at the end of the day, I mean, I do not look forward to sending kids to, college because it is going to be an insane cost. And I'm just purely talking academically, you know,
Right.
it's an undertaking. And so I think those are all good things.
Yeah, that's I actually didn't think about what you were talking about, building your brand for later. Let's say I want to be an assistant coach. I'm not going to be a player, but I want to coach or be in marketing in a professional sports club. That's a good point. Um, I really enjoyed our talk. I wish I could keep you on longer and longer, but I know you're on the East Coast and it's a little later for you. Uh, Again, thank you. And forgive me if I mispronounce it, but I have been practicing Chintan Desai, right?
Correct.
Yes. It was a pleasure having you on. We will include your information for anybody who needs help. And anything else you want to say before we sign off?
Yeah. So I was going to say, even on the NIL stuff, I think it's important that this kind of like decision on what branding is, I think is important even for just even professional athletes. And I say that, and this is my personal plug. So I filed the Hail Murray and the Murray Magic trademarks for Kyler Murray because he was a client of my previous firm. And I think, part of that is really, it was, identifying things that really, set yourself up for later. So one of the things like, is setting up a foundation, right? So you have like athletes like LeBron James and Tom Brady who filed like 100, I think Tom Brady's like 120 plus trademarks. LeBron James like 60 plus. But then within that, they have all these foundations, right? And so on a smaller level, even, I think it's important for athletes, influencers, entertainers to not just think about, okay, in this vacuum, what am I doing? And ride the wave. It's I have this opportunity to kind of, make what I can get, but also lay down where I want to be, like my legacy 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And I think it's important to kind of have that mindset because just as easily as you get into the, spotlight, it's very quickly you can be out of the spotlight. And so I think it's one of those things that is important to think about because, and it goes back to Jay-Z, where he said, I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman. And I go back to that because it's true. At the end of the day, you are the business, your name is it. So, you control the narrative and you decide because once it's out there, it's out there.
I agree. Thank you. Thank you for everything. I really enjoyed our conversation. It was a pleasure having you on. I wish you luck, and hopefully we can catch up later in your career when I'm definitely going to hit you up when this NIL expands more because I want to pick your brain.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you so much.
Have a good day.